Marcus Williams thought his world had ended when the rejection email appeared in his inbox at 2:47 a.m. After 3 years of blood, sweat and sacrifice, after being the backbone of the university's elite debate team, after countless victories that brought glory to their institution, he was being cast out like yesterday's trash. The reason? A single moment of standing up for what was right had branded him as difficult to work with and not aligned with team values. But sometimes, being expelled from something toxic is the universe's way of saving you from watching it burn from the inside. What Marcus didn't know that cold October morning was that his expulsion would become the catalyst for exposing the rot that had been festering within the squad for years. He didn't know that the very people who had voted him out would soon come crawling back, begging for his help as their perfect little empire crumbled around them. And he certainly didn't know that his departure would trigger a chain of events that would shake the foundations of everything they had built. This is the story of how being thrown away became the greatest gift Marcus never knew he needed, and how watching from the outside sometimes gives you the clearest view of the truth. Marcus Williams stared at the email for the third time, his coffee growing cold in his hands. The words blurred together, but their meaning remained crystal clear. After 3 years of dedication, countless late nights, and more victories than defeats, he was being removed from the Westfield University elite debate squad. The email came from Sarah Chen, the team captain. Though Marcus knew the real power behind this decision lay elsewhere. Sarah had been his friend once, back when they were both eager freshmen trying to prove themselves. Now, she was delivering news that would change everything he had worked toward. Due to recent behavioral concerns and your inability to align with team dynamics, the coaching staff has decided that your continued participation would not serve the best interests of the squad. This decision is final and effective immediately. Marcus leaned back in his dorm room chair, the familiar sounds of campus life drifting through his window. Students laughed as they walked past, their biggest worry probably an upcoming midterm or weekend plans. He envied their simplicity. His world had just shifted on its axis, and they had no idea. The behavioral concerns mentioned in the email stemmed from a single incident 3 weeks ago. During practice, Coach Davidson had introduced a new training method that involved deliberately humiliating newer team members to build character and resilience. Marcus had watched in horror as Jennifer Park, a promising sophomore, was reduced to tears while the senior members hurled personal attacks disguised as constructive criticism. When Jennifer ran from the room, sobbing, Marcus had stood up and challenged the coach, not with shouting or disrespect, but with pointed questions about whether this was truly preparing them for actual debates or simply satisfying some sadistic urge to break people down. The room had fallen silent. Senior members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Coach Davidson's face had turned 3 shades of red. "If you have a problem with my methods, Williams, perhaps this team isn't right for you," Davidson had said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Maybe it isn't," Marcus had replied, helping gather Jennifer's scattered notes. "But that doesn't make it right." That conversation had sealed his fate, though he hadn't realized it at the time. In the days that followed, he noticed the subtle changes. Conversations would stop when he entered rooms. Practice schedules were shared without including him. His suggestions during strategy sessions were dismissed without consideration. Marcus had tried to reach out to Sarah privately, hoping their friendship might bridge whatever gap had formed. They met at the campus coffee shop where they used to spend hours discussing argument techniques and tournament strategies. "Sarah, what's happening?" "I feel like I'm being frozen out, and I don't understand why," Marcus had said, stirring his latte nervously. Sarah avoided his eyes, focusing instead on her phone. "Marcus, you have to understand the position you put everyone in. Coach Davidson has connections throughout the college debate circuit. He's helped dozens of students get into law school, landed scholarships, opened doors that would otherwise remain closed. So we should just accept whatever he does?"
Even when it's clearly wrong.
It's not that simple. Sarah's voice carried a frustration that surprised him. "You think you're being noble, standing up for what's right, but you're not seeing the bigger picture."
"Jennifer will get over being embarrassed. But if Coach Davidson decides our program isn't worth his time, we all suffer. Jennifer shouldn't have to get over being deliberately humiliated, and if standing up for basic human decency means I don't fit in, then maybe I really don't belong here." Sarah had looked at him then, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of the person he used to know.
"Maybe you don't," she said softly. But her words cut deeper than any shout could have.
Now, holding the expulsion email, Marcus realized that conversation had been Sarah's way of preparing him for what was coming. She hadn't been seeking his perspective or trying to understand his position. She had been delivering a warning, giving him a chance to fall in line or face the consequences. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Jennifer Park. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry. This is all my fault," Marcus typed back quickly. "This has nothing to do with you. Don't let them make you think it does." Her response came immediately. "But if I had just dealt with it, if I hadn't run out like that, you wouldn't have had to defend me. Jennifer, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You were being mistreated, and any decent person would have spoken up. Don't let them convince you that their behavior was acceptable." The typing indicator showed she was crafting a response, but minutes passed without a message. Marcus could picture her on the other side of campus, probably second-guessing herself, wondering if she was really cut out for competitive debate. He had seen it happen before. Promising students who got chewed up by the program's toxic culture and either quit or transformed themselves into something harder, colder, just to survive. Marcus walked to his window and looked out at the quad where students gathered between classes. He spotted several members of the debate team sitting at their usual table under the large oak tree. From a distance, they looked like any other group of college friends, sharing lunch and laughing together. But Marcus knew better now. He understood the hierarchy, the unspoken rules, the way certain people's comfort came at the expense of others. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed his mother's number. "Hi, Mom. Marcus, honey, you sound terrible." "What's wrong?" His mother had always been able to read him through his voice, even over the phone. It was a talent that had served her well during his teenage years when he tried to hide various mishaps and minor rebellions. "I got kicked off the debate team," he said, surprised by how much it hurt to say the words aloud. The silence stretched for several seconds. His mother knew how much the team meant to him, how hard he had worked to earn his spot, how proud he was of their accomplishments. "What happened?" she asked finally, her voice careful and controlled. Marcus told her everything. The incident with Jennifer, his confrontation with Coach Davidson, the gradual isolation that followed, and finally the email that morning. His mother listened without interruption, asking only occasional clarifying questions. "You know what this reminds me of?" she said when he finished. "What? Do you remember when you were in middle school and you got suspended for fighting with Tommy Richardson?" Marcus groaned. "Mom, this is completely different." "Is it? You saw Tommy picking on that new kid David something. David was smaller, quieter, and Tommy was making his life miserable. You told Tommy to stop, and when he didn't, you stepped in. You got suspended, and Tommy got a warning." "Yeah, and it was unfair then too. But do you remember what happened after that? Tommy's friends started avoiding him. Other kids began standing up to his bullying. Within a month, he was eating lunch alone and trying to apologize to everyone he had hurt." Marcus sat down on his bed, considering his mother's words. "You think something like that will happen here? I think people notice more than they let on. You weren't the only one uncomfortable with what was happening, Marcus. You were just the only one brave enough to say something." After they hung up, Marcus found himself thinking about his mother's story. He remembered David, the quiet kid who Tommy had tormented. David had gone on to become class president their senior year of high school, while Tommy had faded into obscurity, his carefully constructed social power evaporating once people stopped being afraid of him. But this felt different. The stakes were higher. These weren't middle school social dynamics. They were college students with futures to consider, careers to build, recommendations to secure. The power structures were more complex, more entrenched. Marcus pulled out his laptop and began composing an email to his academic advisor, Dr. Martinez. He needed to discuss how this expulsion might affect his pre-law track, his letters of recommendation, his planned law school applications. The debate team had been central to his academic identity. Without it, he would need to rebuild his entire college narrative. As he typed, Marcus found himself thinking about the other team members. Beyond Sarah and the obvious coach loyalists, there were people like Michael Torres, who had joined the team because he genuinely loved the art of argument and debate. There was Amanda Foster, whose quick wit and sharp research skills had saved them in more than one tournament. There was even David Kim, who rarely spoke up in meetings but whose strategic insights were usually spot on. How many of them were truly comfortable with Coach Davidson's methods? How many were simply going along because it seemed easier than challenging the system? How many were like Sarah, convinced that the ends justified the means? Marcus's email to Dr. Martinez was professional but honest. He explained the situation without dramatizing it, outlined his concerns about his academic trajectory, and requested a meeting to discuss his options. After sending it, he felt a small sense of relief. At least he was taking action rather than simply wallowing in the unfairness of it all. The afternoon passed slowly. Marcus attended his regular classes, but found it difficult to concentrate. His mind kept drifting back to the debate team, to the tournaments they had coming up, to the arguments they had prepared together. Despite everything that had happened, he still cared about their success. It frustrated him to realize that he was worried about how they would perform without him, even though they had made it clear they didn't want him there. That evening, Marcus met his roommate Jake for dinner at the campus dining hall. Jake was a computer science major with little interest in debate or campus politics, which made him an ideal person to talk through the situation. "So they kicked you out for telling a coach not to be a jerk to students?" Jake asked around a bite of pizza. "Essentially, yes. And you're upset about this, why?" Marcus stared at his friend. "Because I worked really hard to be on that team. Because I was good at it. Because it was supposed to help me get into law school." "Okay, but hear me out," Jake said, holding up a hand. "You got kicked out for standing up for someone who was being treated badly. That sounds exactly like what a lawyer should do. Any law school that doesn't see that probably isn't worth your time anyway." Jake's perspective was refreshingly simple, even if it didn't address the practical concerns about recommendations and extracurricular activities. But it did remind Marcus why he had spoken up in the first place. It hadn't been a calculated decision designed to advance his own interests. It had been an instinctive response to witnessing something wrong. "Besides," Jake continued, "if this team is as messed up as you're describing, maybe getting out now is the best thing that could happen to you. Sometimes you don't realize you're in a toxic situation until you're removed from it." That night, Marcus lay in bed thinking about Jake's words. Was the debate team toxic? He had been so focused on the recent incident that he hadn't really examined the broader culture. But now, removed from the day-to-day dynamics, certain patterns became clearer. The way newer members were treated as servants rather than team members. The unquestioned authority given to Coach Davidson, even when his decisions seemed arbitrary or cruel. The pressure to conform, to avoid rocking the boat, to prioritize winning over everything else. The subtle way dissent was discouraged and conformity rewarded. Marcus realized he had been complicit in some of this culture, even as he had grown uncomfortable with it. He had watched other students get the Jennifer treatment and told himself it wasn't his place to intervene. He had benefited from being one of the good team members, one of those who fit in and played by the unspoken rules. It was only when the abuse became so blatant, so obviously wrong, that he couldn't ignore it anymore. And even then, his intervention hadn't been planned or strategic. It had simply been impossible to sit silent while another human being was deliberately humiliated. As Marcus finally drifted off to sleep, one thought echoed in his mind. If being expelled was the price for doing what he believed was right, then maybe it was a price worth paying. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that this story was far from over, that his departure might be the beginning of something larger rather than simply the end of his own involvement. He had no way of knowing how right he was, or how much the team would need him in the months to come. 2 months after Marcus's expulsion, the first signs of trouble appeared during what should have been the debate team's moment of triumph. The regional championship was supposed to be their crowning achievement, a validation of Coach Davidson's methods and the team's dedication to excellence. Instead, it became the beginning of their unraveling. Marcus learned about the disaster through Jennifer Park, who had started meeting him for coffee every Thursday afternoon. These sessions had begun as informal support meetings after his expulsion, but had evolved into genuine friendship. Jennifer had remained on the team, though her experience had left her wary and watchful. "You're not going to believe what happened at regionals," Jennifer said, sliding into the chair across from Marcus at their usual corner table in the campus coffee shop. Marcus looked up from his constitutional law textbook. Since leaving the debate team, he had thrown himself into his studies with renewed focus. His grades had actually improved, and he had discovered a passion for research that he hadn't realized was being stifled by the competitive pressure of constant tournaments. "Tell me," he said, closing his book and giving Jennifer his full attention. Jennifer looked around nervously, as if checking for eavesdroppers. The paranoia that had developed within the team was apparent in her manner. Sarah had a complete breakdown during the semi-final round. Marcus felt a jolt of concern. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah was still someone he cared about. "What kind of breakdown?" She froze up completely. Middle of her rebuttal argument, just stopped talking and stared at the judges for like 30 seconds. Then she started crying and ran out of the room. "That's not like Sarah at all. She's one of the most composed speakers I've ever seen." That's what everyone thought. But Marcus, you should have seen her the past few weeks leading up to regionals. She was barely sleeping, snapping at everyone, checking and double-checking every argument until nothing made sense anymore. Jennifer pulled out her phone and showed Marcus a photo from the tournament. In it, the team members stood in formal poses, but their smiles looked forced and tired. Coach Davidson stood in the center, his hand possessively on Sarah's shoulder, his expression stern despite what was clearly meant to be a celebratory photo. "Look at everyone's eyes," Jennifer said softly. Marcus studied the image more carefully. What he saw disturbed him.
These were students who should have been excited about representing their university, but instead they looked exhausted, anxious, almost fearful.
Davidson's been pushing everyone harder since you left, Jennifer continued.
He keeps saying that losing a key team member means everyone else has to step up, work twice as hard, be twice as perfect. Sarah's been getting the worst of it because she's captain. How bad is the worst of it? Jennifer glanced around again before answering. He's been having private meetings with her almost daily, picking apart every speech, every argument, every decision. She told me he made her rewrite the same opening statement 17 times because it wasn't intellectually rigorous enough. Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. That's not coaching, that's harassment. I know. But what can we do? Sarah won't complain officially because she needs Davidson's recommendation for law school.
Everyone else is too scared to say anything because they've seen what happens to people who challenge him. You mean what happened to me?
Exactly. Jennifer stirred her latte absently.
But Marcus, it's getting worse. After Sarah's breakdown at regionals, Davidson called an emergency team meeting. He blamed the loss on weak leadership and insufficient commitment to excellence. He actually suggested that Sarah might need to be replaced as captain. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Sarah had worked for 3 years to earn the captain position. She had sacrificed social relationships, family time, and her own peace of mind for the team. The idea that Davidson would throw her under the bus after one bad performance was both predictable and sickening. How did Sarah react to that? She apologized. Can you believe it? She stood up in front of the whole team and apologized for letting everyone down. She promised to work harder, be better, not disappoint anyone again. Jennifer's voice carried a mixture of sadness and frustration. It was painful to watch. Marcus thought about the Sarah he had known when they were both freshmen, confident, quick-witted, passionate about justice and argument. The person Jennifer was describing sounded like a broken version of that bright young woman. "There's something else," Jennifer said, her voice dropping even lower. "Amanda Foster is talking about quitting." This surprised Marcus more than Sarah's breakdown. Amanda was one of the most talented debaters on the team, with a natural ability to think on her feet and craft compelling arguments under pressure. She was also one of the most level-headed members, someone who rarely got caught up in drama or politics. Amanda? Why? She's been watching what happened to Sarah and realizing she could be next. Davidson's been making comments about how Amanda needs to show more killer instinct and stop being so soft in her arguments. She told me privately that she joined the debate team to learn critical thinking and persuasive speaking, not to learn how to tear people down. Jennifer paused to take a sip of her coffee, then continued. "She asked me something interesting yesterday. She wanted to know if I thought you were happier now that you're off the team. What did you tell her?" "The truth. That you seem more relaxed, more like yourself. That your academic work has improved. That you're pursuing things you're actually interested in rather than just trying to win arguments." Marcus considered this. It was true that he felt more balanced now. Without the constant pressure of tournaments and team politics, he had rediscovered his genuine love of learning. He had started volunteering at a local legal aid clinic, gotten involved with a campus organization that provided free tutoring to first-generation college students, and even joined an intramural soccer team just for fun. "I am happier," he admitted. "I didn't realize how much stress I was carrying from being on the team until it was gone." That's what Amanda thought you'd say. She's been thinking about what she really wants from her college experience, and she's not sure the debate team is helping her get there anymore. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Michael Torres, one of Marcus's former teammates. Michael approached their table hesitantly, clearly unsure of his reception. "Marcus, hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" Marcus gestured to an empty chair. "Sure, sit down." Michael glanced nervously at Jennifer before sitting. "I probably shouldn't be seen talking to you guys. Davidson's made it pretty clear that contact with former team members isn't encouraged." "We're not contagious, Michael," Marcus said with a slight smile. I know. It's just," Michael ran his hands through his hair, a gesture Marcus remembered from stressful tournament moments. "Things have been really intense since you left. And after what happened at regionals, it's gotten even worse. Jennifer was telling me about Sarah's breakdown. That was just the beginning. Davidson blamed the loss on team chemistry issues and insufficient preparation. He's implemented new policies that are supposed to address these problems. What kind of policies? Michael looked around the coffee shop before answering. Mandatory daily practice sessions, even on weekends. No social media during tournament weeks. Required study groups where team members review each other's arguments and provide constructive criticism. Weekly one-on-one meetings with Davidson where he evaluates our performance and attitude. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances. These policies sounded less like coaching strategies and more like control mechanisms.
The worst part, Michael continued, is the new team evaluation system. We're supposed to rate each other's performance and commitment level on a weekly basis. The ratings factor into tournament selection and scholarship considerations.
So you're being asked to spy on each other, Marcus said flatly. That's not how Davidson describes it, but yeah, basically. And people are taking it seriously because they're scared of being the next person to get cut from the team. Jennifer leaned forward. Michael, do you realize how crazy this all sounds? We're talking about a college debate team, not the military or some corporate training program. I know it sounds extreme, but Davidson says this is what it takes to compete at the highest levels. He keeps pointing to programs at other schools that have similar intensity levels. Marcus had heard this justification before. It was always possible to find examples of excessive behavior if you looked hard enough, and there were always coaches willing to defend harsh methods by claiming they were necessary for success. Michael, can I ask you something? Marcus said. Are you actually enjoying debate anymore? Do you wake up excited about practice or do you dread it? Michael was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was subdued. I used to love it. The research, the strategy, the intellectual challenge of crafting arguments and responding to counterpoints. But now it feels like work. Stressful, exhausting work where I'm constantly worried about making mistakes. That's not how it's supposed to feel, Jennifer said gently. I know. But what choice do I have? I'm a junior now. I need the team on my resume for law school applications. I need Davidson's recommendation. I need the scholarship money that comes with being on the team. I can't just walk away like, he stopped himself, but the implication was clear. Like I did, Marcus finished. Michael, I didn't walk away. I was kicked out for standing up to behavior that was wrong then and is apparently getting worse now. I didn't mean it like that. I just meant that your situation was different. You're academically strong enough to succeed without the team. Some of us need what the team provides, even if the cost is getting higher. Marcus understood Michael's position, but he also saw the trap that Davidson had created. By tying team membership to academic success, scholarships, and recommendations, the coach had made it extremely difficult for students to leave voluntarily. They were dependent on his approval for their future prospects, which gave him enormous power over their daily lives. After Michael left, Jennifer and Marcus sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Bet it's getting worse, isn't it?
Jennifer finally said.
Yeah, it is. Davidson is doubling down on his methods, instead of examining whether they're actually effective. What do you think will happen? Marcus considered the question carefully. Based on what he had heard, the team was operating under an unsustainable level of pressure and control. People were scared, exhausted, and beginning to question whether the benefits were worth the costs. I think more people are going to break, he said finally. Sarah's breakdown was just the beginning. When you create an environment where people are constantly stressed, constantly being evaluated and criticized, constantly worried about their place on the team, eventually something has to give. Should we do something? Try to help somehow? I don't know what we could do that wouldn't make things worse for the people still on the team. Davidson has made it clear that contact with me is discouraged. Any intervention from me would probably be seen as proof that I'm trying to undermine the team out of spite. Jennifer nodded sadly. So we just watch and hope people figure it out on their own? For now, yes. But Jennifer, I want you to promise me something. If the situation becomes truly unbearable, if Davidson crosses lines that you can't live with, don't sacrifice your mental health for a team that doesn't value you as a person. There are other ways to achieve your goals. I promise, she said, though Marcus could hear the uncertainty in her voice. As they parted ways that afternoon, Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation with Michael. The fear in the young man's eyes had been unmistakable. He was trapped in a situation he didn't enjoy, doing things that went against his better judgment, because he believed he had no other choice. It reminded Marcus of stories he had heard about toxic workplaces, abusive relationships, and cult-like organizations. The pattern was always the same: isolate people from outside support, make them dependent on the organization for their identity and future prospects, then gradually increase the demands and control until abuse became normalized. Davidson hadn't started with the extreme policies Michael described. He had begun with high standards and intense preparation, things that seemed reasonable for a competitive team. But success had given him credibility, and credibility had given him power. Now he was using that power to reshape the team culture into something unrecognizable from what Marcus had originally joined. That evening, Marcus called his mother to update her on the situation. She listened carefully as he described the team's deteriorating dynamics and his former teammates' struggles. "It sounds like you dodged a bullet," she said when he finished. "I feel guilty, though. Like maybe I should be doing something to help them." "Marcus, you tried to help when you were on the team, remember? That's what got you expelled. Sometimes the best thing you can do is be an example of what life looks like outside of a toxic system." Her words resonated with Marcus. Perhaps his role now wasn't to rescue his former teammates, but simply to demonstrate that success and happiness were possible without submitting to Davidson's increasingly authoritarian methods. Still, as he fell asleep that night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was heading towards some kind of crisis. The pressure Davidson was applying couldn't be sustained indefinitely. Eventually, something would have to break, and when it did, he suspected the damage would extend far beyond just one person's tournament performance. The crisis Marcus had sensed building finally erupted on a cold February morning, when Amanda Foster appeared at his dorm room door, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking with barely contained rage. "He's destroying people, Marcus," she said without preamble as he opened the door. "Davidson is literally destroying human beings, and everyone's pretending it's normal." Marcus ushered her inside, offering her a chair and a glass of water while she collected herself. Amanda was usually the picture of composure, someone who approached problems with methodical thinking and careful analysis. Seeing her this distraught was alarming. "What happened?" Marcus asked gently. "David Kim tried to kill himself last night." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. David was a quiet, thoughtful junior who contributed solid research and strategic insights to the team. He wasn't a star performer like Sarah or Amanda, but he was reliable, hardworking, and well-liked by his teammates.
Is he okay?
"He's in the hospital. His roommate found him in time, thank God. But Marcus, I know why he did it, and it's making me sick." Amanda took a shaky breath before continuing. "You know how Davidson implemented those weekly evaluation reports, where team members rate each other's performance and commitment?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Well, David's been receiving consistently negative evaluations for the past month. Not because his work was bad, but because he wasn't aggressive enough in arguments, wasn't showing sufficient killer instinct. Davidson started having daily meetings with David, telling him he was disappointing the team, that he needed to develop a tougher mindset or risk losing his position." "That's psychological abuse," Marcus said flatly. "It gets worse." Last week, Davidson announced that David would need to participate in a special intensive training session. He was supposed to spend an entire weekend being deliberately attacked by other team members while defending increasingly ridiculous positions. The goal was to break him down and rebuild him stronger. Marcus felt nauseous. The training session Amanda described sounded like something from a military hazing ritual, not an educational program. David tried to refuse, but Davidson told him it wasn't optional. If he wanted to stay on the team, if he wanted Davidson's recommendation for graduate school, if he wanted to maintain his partial scholarship, he had to prove he was committed to improving. And none of the other team members objected? That's the most disgusting part. Some people were uncomfortable, but everyone went along with it because they were afraid of being next. Sarah even volunteered to help lead the session because she thought it would prove her commitment after the regional championship disaster. Amanda stood up and began pacing Marcus's small dorm room. So David went through with it. 12 hours of being verbally attacked, insulted, and humiliated, while Davidson watched and took notes. They made him defend arguments he didn't believe, forced him to respond to personal attacks about his appearance, his intelligence, his worth as a team member. Please tell me someone stopped it. No one stopped anything. By the end of the weekend, David was completely broken. He couldn't speak without stammering, couldn't make eye contact with anyone. He spent the next week barely eating, barely sleeping, just sitting in his room staring at the wall. Marcus sank into his desk chair, overwhelmed by the horror of what he was hearing. This wasn't coaching or even hazing. This was systematic psychological torture disguised as team building. His roommate told me that David kept saying he was worthless, that he couldn't do anything right, that everyone would be better off without him. Last night, he swallowed an entire bottle of sleeping pills. The room fell silent except for the sound of Amanda's ragged breathing. Marcus tried to process what he had learned, tried to understand how a college extracurricular activity had devolved into something so destructive.
Amanda, have you talked to anyone in the administration about this? The dean of students? Academic affairs? Anyone? That's why I'm here.
I need your help. If I report this alone, Davidson will claim I'm a disgruntled team member making up stories. But if we both come forward, if we can get other people to speak up, maybe someone will finally listen. Marcus didn't hesitate. Of course I'll help. We need to document everything, gather testimony from other team members, build a case that's impossible to ignore. There's something else you should know, Amanda said quietly. Jennifer Park wants to come forward too. So does Michael Torres.
Even Sarah is starting to question whether what happened to David was her fault. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus and Amanda developed a plan. They would need to be methodical and careful, collecting evidence and testimony while protecting the people brave enough to speak up. Davidson had significant influence within the university, and any investigation would need to be bulletproof to succeed. Amanda left to coordinate with the other potential witnesses, while Marcus began researching the university's policies on student organization oversight, faculty conduct, and student safety. What he found was encouraging. Westfield University had clear guidelines about creating safe educational environments and strict policies about psychological harassment. That afternoon, Marcus received a text from Jennifer asking him to meet her at the library. He found her in a secluded corner of the graduate study section, surrounded by debate team documents and files.
I've been going through everything, Jennifer said without preamble. All the team communications, Davidson's coaching notes, the evaluation reports. Marcus, this is so much worse than I realized. She spread the documents across the table like evidence in a criminal case. Look at this progression. 3 years ago, when you were still on the team, the coaching notes were about argument structure, research techniques, presentation skills, normal debate coaching stuff. Marcus examined the older documents. They showed a coach focused on developing student abilities, providing constructive feedback, and building team cohesion through shared goals and mutual support. Now look at this year's documents, Jennifer continued, sliding another stack of papers toward him. The contrast was striking. Recent coaching notes were filled with psychological assessments of team members, detailed plans for breaking down resistance to authority, and explicit strategies for using fear and competition to motivate performance. One document actually included a section titled, Identifying and Exploiting Individual Weaknesses. This reads like a manual for psychological manipulation, Marcus said, horrified. There's more. I found emails between Davidson and coaches at other schools where he brags about his innovative training methods and discusses techniques for reshaping student psychology to optimize competitive performance. Jennifer pulled out her laptop and showed Marcus a particularly damning email exchange. In it, Davidson described David Kim as promising subject for intensive restructuring and detailed his plans for the weekend session that had ultimately broken the young man. He's treating students like lab rats, Marcus said, his anger building. The worst part is that some other coaches were interested in his methods. There's a whole network of people who think this kind of psychological abuse is the future of competitive debate. Marcus spent the next hour reviewing the evidence Jennifer had compiled. The pattern was clear and deeply disturbing. Davidson had gradually transformed a legitimate educational program into something resembling a psychological experiment, with students as unwilling subjects. We have enough evidence to end his career, Marcus said finally. But we need to be smart about how we present it. This can't look like a vendetta from expelled students. That's why Sarah's cooperation is so important, Jennifer replied. She's the team captain. If she confirms what happened to David and acknowledges the broader pattern of abuse, it becomes impossible to dismiss our claims. As if summoned by their conversation, Sarah Chen appeared at their table. She looked terrible, her usually perfect appearance disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. I heard you've been gathering evidence, she said quietly, sliding into an empty chair. I want to help. Marcus studied his former friend carefully. Sarah, you need to understand what you're risking. Davidson has significant influence over your future prospects. Coming forward could cost you his recommendation, your scholarship, maybe even your position as captain. I know. But Marcus, I can't live with myself anymore. David almost died because of something I participated in. I helped Davidson torture a sweet, harmless kid because I was too scared and selfish to stand up to him. Sarah's voice broke slightly as she continued. You tried to warn us months ago when you challenged Davidson about Jennifer's treatment. You saw where this was heading before any of us did. I should have listened to you then. Maybe if I had, Dave would be okay now. Sarah, what's done is done. The question now is how we prevent Davidson from hurting anyone else. Sarah nodded and pulled out a folder of documents. I've brought copies of everything I have access to as team captain. Meeting minutes, training schedules, Davidson's personal notes about team members, even recordings of some team meetings. Recordings?
Davidson started recording meetings last semester as part of his new evaluations.
He said it was to help team members review their contributions and identify areas for improvement. But listening to them now, you can hear how he gradually ramped up the psychological pressure. Over the next 2 hours, the 3 students organized their evidence into a comprehensive case against Davidson. They had documentation of policy violations, witness testimony from multiple team members, and Davidson's own written communications proving his intentional use of psychological manipulation techniques. This is overwhelming, Marcus said, reviewing their final compilation. No reasonable administrator could see this and allowed Davidson to continue coaching students. So what's our next step? Jennifer asked. Marcus had been thinking about this question carefully.
We need to present this to multiple people simultaneously so Davidson can't try to control the narrative or pressure individual administrators. I suggest we approach the Dean of Students, the Faculty Athletics Committee, and the University President's Office all at the same time.
Should we warn Davidson that we're filing complaints? Sarah asked. Absolutely not. He's proven he's willing to use his influence to protect himself and punish anyone who challenges him. If he gets advance warning, he'll start destroying evidence and pressuring other students to recant their testimony. They agreed to submit their formal complaints the following Monday, giving them the weekend to finalize their documentation and prepare for what would likely be intense scrutiny of their claims. As they prepared to leave the library, Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm. I need you to know how sorry I am, she said, tears starting to flow again. You were right about everything, and I was too cowardly to admit it. You lost your place on the team for standing up for what was right, and I threw you under the bus to protect myself. Marcus looked at the young woman who had once been one of his closest friends. He could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, but also the psychological damage that months of Davidson's manipulation had inflicted. Sarah, Davidson is an expert at psychological manipulation. He created an environment where good people felt they had to choose between their values and their futures. You weren't cowardly. You were trapped in a system designed to exploit your vulnerabilities. But you resisted. You stood up to him even when it cost you everything. I got lucky. I had support systems outside the team, family who reminded me of my values, a sense of self that wasn't completely dependent on Davidson's approval. Not everyone has those advantages. As Marcus walked back to his dorm that evening, he reflected on the distance he had traveled since his expulsion 6 months ago. What had initially felt like a devastating setback had ultimately freed him from a toxic environment and positioned him to help prevent further harm to other students. He thought about David Kim, lying in a hospital bed recovering from a suicide attempt triggered by systematic psychological abuse. He thought about the other team members who were still trapped in Davidson's web of manipulation, too scared or dependent to break free. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. It was time to end Davidson's reign of terror and ensure that no other student would suffer the way David had. The evidence they had compiled was overwhelming, the witnesses credible and the case compelling. But Marcus also knew that powerful people rarely gave up their positions without a fight. Davidson would likely try to discredit his accusers, claim that disgruntled former students were making false allegations, and use his connections within the university to protect himself. The real test would come in the days and weeks following their formal complaints. Would the university administration have the courage to confront a successful coach whose teams had brought prestige to the institution? Would they prioritize student safety over competitive achievement? Marcus fell asleep that night feeling nervous but determined. For the first time since his expulsion, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The fight ahead would be difficult, but it was the right fight, and he was ready for it. The university's response to their formal complaints exceeded Marcus's most optimistic expectations. Within hours of submitting their evidence, Dean Patricia Walsh had suspended Coach Davidson pending a full investigation, and by Wednesday morning, a special committee had been formed to review the debate program's practices and policies. Marcus first learned about the administration's swift action through a frantic phone call from Michael Torres. Marcus, campus is going crazy. Davidson's been suspended. There are investigators interviewing team members, and everyone's asking what the hell is going on. How are people reacting? It's split. Some people are relieved, like they've been waiting for someone to finally speak up. But others are panicking because they think their letters of recommendation are ruined and their law school applications are screwed. Marcus had anticipated this division. Davidson had been careful to create a system where students felt dependent on his approval, making it emotionally and practically difficult for them to support any challenge to his authority. What about the team members who participated in David's weekend session? How are they handling the investigation?
That's the weird part, Michael said. Most of them seemed genuinely shocked when investigators described what they participated in. It's like they didn't realize how extreme it was while it was happening. This didn't surprise Marcus either. One of Davidson's most insidious talents had been his ability to gradually normalize abusive behavior, incrementally increasing the pressure and manipulation until students lost perspective on what constituted reasonable treatment. Have you been interviewed yet?
Yesterday. They asked me about team dynamics, Davidson's coaching methods, and whether I ever witnessed behavior that made me uncomfortable. Marcus, I told them everything.
About the evaluation reports, the mandatory weekend sessions, the way Davidson used fear and humiliation as motivational tools.
How did they react? The investigators were professional, but I could tell they were disturbed by what I was describing. One of them asked me why I never reported Davidson's behavior myself, and I couldn't give him a good answer. Marcus understood Michael's struggle with that question. It was easy to judge people for their inaction when you are outside the system, but much harder to resist when you are trapped within it, dependent on the abuser's approval for your future prospects. That afternoon, Marcus received a call from Dean Walsh's office requesting his immediate presence for an interview with the investigative committee. He arrived at the administration building to find a conference room filled with serious-faced officials, including 2 members of the Board of Trustees he recognized from university publications.
Mr. Williams, thank you for coming, Dean Walsh began. I want to start by acknowledging the courage it took for you and your fellow students to bring these allegations forward. The evidence you've provided has already prompted significant changes in how we oversee student organizations. The lead investigator, a stern woman introduced as Dr. Rebecca Torres from the university's Legal Affairs Office, took over the questioning. Mr. Williams, you were expelled from the debate team approximately 6 months ago.
Can you walk us through the circumstances that led to your dismissal? Marcus recounted the incident with Jennifer Park in detail, describing Davidson's humiliation tactics and his own decision to intervene. He explained how his challenge to the coach's methods had resulted in his gradual isolation from the team and eventual expulsion.
At the time of your expulsion, did you consider filing a complaint with the university administration? I thought about it, but I convinced myself that it was just one incident, that maybe I had overreacted or misunderstood the situation.
I also worried that filing a complaint would look like sour grapes from a dismissed team member. Doctor. Torres nodded understanding. What changed your mind about coming forward now? David Kim's suicide attempt. When I learned that Davidson had subjected a student to systematic psychological abuse to the point where he tried to take his own life, I realized this wasn't about debate tactics or coaching philosophy. This was about preventing serious harm to vulnerable young people. The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, with the committee asking detailed questions about team culture, Davidson's evolution as a coach, and the broader impact of his methods on student well-being. Marcus answered as honestly and thoroughly as possible, providing context and background that helped the investigators understand how the abuse had developed and escalated over time. Mr. Williams, based on your experience and observations, do you believe Coach Davidson deliberately set out to psychologically manipulate and abuse students? Or do you think he genuinely believed his methods were educational? Marcus considered the question carefully. I think Davidson started with good intentions. He wanted to build a successful program and help students develop their abilities. But success gave him power, and power corrupted his judgment. Over time, he became more interested in controlling students than educating them. You're suggesting this was a gradual transformation rather than malicious intent from the beginning? I'm suggesting that the impact on students is the same regardless of Davidson's original intentions. Whether he meant to cause harm is less important than the fact that he did cause harm and continued causing harm even when the damage to students became obvious. As Marcus left the interview, he felt cautiously optimistic about the investigation's direction. The committee members had asked thoughtful questions, demonstrated genuine concern for student welfare, and appeared committed to conducting a thorough review of the evidence. That optimism was tested the following day when Jennifer called him with disturbing news. Davidson's fighting back, she said without preamble. He's hired a lawyer, and he's claiming that disgruntled former students are making false accusations to destroy his career. That's not unexpected. What specifically is he claiming? His lawyer sent a statement to the campus newspaper alleging that you, Amanda, and I conspired to fabricate evidence because we couldn't handle the rigorous standards of competitive debate. He's claiming that David's suicide attempt had nothing to do with the team and everything to do with pre-existing mental health issues. Marcus felt a familiar anger rising in his chest. Even facing a serious investigation, Davidson was continuing to manipulate and deflect, refusing to take responsibility for the harm he had caused. Has anyone from the team come forward to support Davidson's version of events? A few people, mostly seniors who are desperate to protect their law school applications and need Davidson's recommendations. They're claiming that his coaching methods were demanding but not abusive, and that some students just couldn't handle the pressure of elite competition. And what about the evidence we provided? The recordings, the emails, the documentation of his psychological manipulation techniques? Davidson's lawyer is claiming that we took everything out of context, that normal coaching communications were being twisted to make him look bad. This response was both predictable and troubling. Davidson was using his remaining influence to pressure loyal team members into supporting his narrative while attempting to discredit the substantial evidence of his misconduct. The battle lines were drawn more clearly the following week, when the campus newspaper published a lengthy article about the investigation. The headline read, "Debate Team Coach Suspended Amid Abuse Allegations," and the story included interviews with both supporters and critics of Davidson's methods. Marcus was quoted extensively in the article, describing his expulsion and the events that led to the current investigation. But the story also included statements from current team members who praised Davidson's dedication and questioned the motives of his accusers.
Coach Davidson pushed us to be our best, said senior team member Rachel Martinez. Yes, his standards were high, but that's what it takes to compete at the national level.
Some people just couldn't handle the pressure and are now trying to blame him for their own shortcomings. Reading those words, Marcus felt a mixture of sadness and frustration. Rachel was an intelligent, capable student who had been thoroughly manipulated into defending her abuser. She genuinely believed that the psychological torture Davidson had inflicted was normal coaching, that students who couldn't tolerate systematic humiliation were simply weak. The article also revealed new details about David Kim's condition. According to his family, David was recovering physically, but struggling with severe depression and anxiety that his doctors attributed to prolonged psychological stress. His parents had retained their own attorney and were considering additional legal action against both Davidson and the university. This young man's life has been devastated by what can only be described as psychological torture. David's father was quoted as saying, "We trusted the university to provide a safe, supportive educational environment, and they failed our son catastrophically." The public attention brought by the newspaper article created additional pressure for a swift resolution to the investigation. Alumni who had donated to the debate program began asking questions about how their money was being. Parents of current students demanded assurances that their children weren't being subjected to similar treatment. Most significantly, the article caught the attention of Dr. Bordy. Elizabeth Chen, a renowned psychologist who specialized in organizational behavior and psychological abuse. Dr. Kevin Chen reached out to the investigative committee and offered to review the evidence from a professional perspective. Marcus learned about Dr. Joe Robin, Chen's involvement during his second interview with the committee, which took place 3 weeks after his first session. "Mr. Megul Williams, we've had Dr. Chen review the coaching materials and communications you provided," Dean Walsh explained. Her analysis has been quite illuminating. Dr. Chen, a composed woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner, addressed Marcus directly. "Mr. Williams, I've spent 30 years studying psychological manipulation in various contexts, from corporate environments to religious organizations to military training programs. The techniques employed by Coach Davidson represent some of the most sophisticated psychological abuse I've encountered in an educational setting." She pulled out a thick report and opened it to a section marked with numerous colored tabs. Davidson systematically employed isolation, dependency creation, graduated pressure escalation, and identity reconstruction techniques. These are the same methods used by cult leaders and abusive partners to maintain control over their victims. Marcus felt vindicated but also horrified. Having a professional confirm the severity of Davidson's behavior made it impossible to dismiss the team's experience as simply rigorous coaching. Dr. Chen, in your professional opinion, could students subjected to these techniques recognize their abusive nature while they were happening? Absolutely not. These techniques are specifically designed to prevent recognition and resistance. The gradual escalation ensures that victims adapt to increasing levels of abuse, while the dependency creation makes them feel they have no alternative but to comply. The psychologist continued her analysis, explaining how Davidson had used team evaluations to pit students against each other, how he had created artificial crises to maintain constant stress, and how he had deliberately targeted students' core insecurities to maximize his psychological control.
The case of David Kim represents the predictable outcome of these techniques when applied to a vulnerable individual. His suicide attempt wasn't a sign of personal weakness, it was the natural result of systematic psychological destruction. As Marcus listened to Dr. Chen's analysis, he realized how fortunate he had been to resist Davidson's manipulation. His expulsion, which had felt like a devastating setback, had actually saved him from months of additional psychological abuse. "Mr. Williams," Dean Walsh said as the interview concluded, "I want you to know that the university takes these allegations extremely seriously. Based on the evidence provided and Dr. Chan's analysis, we're proceeding with formal disciplinary action against Coach Davidson." What kind of disciplinary action? Termination of his employment and a recommendation that he be permanently barred from coaching positions at any university. We're also reviewing our oversight procedures to ensure that this kind of abuse cannot happen again in any student organization. Marcus felt a surge of relief and satisfaction. Justice was finally being served, and future students would be protected from experiencing what David Kim and others had endured. But as he walked across campus that afternoon, Marcus also felt a lingering sadness for the talented, dedicated students who had been caught up in Davidson's web of manipulation. Some of them, like Rachel Martinez, might never fully understand how thoroughly they had been abused. Others would carry psychological scars for years to come. The investigation had exposed the truth and would prevent future harm. But it couldn't undo the damage already done to bright young minds who had simply wanted to pursue their passion for debate and argument. The real tragedy wasn't just Davidson's behavior, but the destruction of trust, confidence, and intellectual curiosity in students who deserve so much better from their educational experience. Still, Marcus felt hopeful as he approached his dawn. The investigation had proven that institutions could respond appropriately when presented with clear evidence of abuse. Students had found the courage to speak truth to power. And perhaps most importantly, David Kim would recover and find ways to rebuild his life free from the psychological prison Davidson had created. The investigation phase was ending, but Marcus suspected the real work of healing and rebuilding was just beginning. 6 months after Coach Davidson's termination, Marcus received an unexpected invitation that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of his expulsion. Sarah Chen, still officially the debate team captain, but now working with a new interim coach, asked him to return as a volunteer advisor to help rebuild the program's culture and competitive standing. The request came during one of their regular Thursday coffee meetings, which had resumed after the investigation concluded. Sarah had been working through her own psychological recovery with the help of university counseling services, gradually reclaiming her sense of self and her genuine passion for debate. "Marcus, I know this might sound crazy after everything that happened, but I think the team needs your help," Sarah said, stirring her latte nervously. Marcus looked up from the graduate school application he had been reviewing. His own academic trajectory had flourished since leaving the toxic environment of Davidson's program. His grades were excellent, his letters of recommendation were strong, and he had gained valuable experience through his volunteer work at the legal aid clinic. "What kind of help are you talking about? The new coach is great. Professor Martinez from the political science department is everything Davidson wasn't. She's supportive, ethical, focused on education rather than ego. But Marcus, the team is struggling. Half the members quit after the investigation, the remaining students are dealing with trust issues and psychological damage, and our competitive performance has suffered." Sarah paused, searching for the right words. "We need someone who understands what we went through, someone who can help bridge the gap between the nightmare we survived and the healthy program we're trying to build." Marcus considered the request carefully. Part of him felt reluctant to re-enter an environment that had caused him significant pain, but another part recognized the opportunity to help create something positive from the ashes of Davidson's destructive regime. "Sarah, if I were to consider this, I'd need to know that the administration is fully committed to maintaining the reforms they implemented after the investigation." They are. Dean Walsh personally oversees the program now. There are mandatory workshops on healthy coaching practices, regular check-ins with team members, and strict policies about psychological manipulation. Plus, Professor Martinez has been incredible about creating a supportive, educational environment. Over the following week, Marcus met with Professor Martinez to discuss the possibility of his involvement with the rebuilt debate team. Martinez was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had competed in debate during her own undergraduate years and understood both the educational value and potential dangers of competitive programs. "Marcus, I've reviewed the investigation files and spoken with several former team members about your role in exposing Coach Davidson's abuse. Professor Martinez said during their meeting. Your courage in speaking up undoubtedly prevented additional students from being harmed. I appreciate that, but I'm not interested in being some kind of hero figure. If I get involved with the team again, it needs to be about helping students develop their abilities in a healthy environment. That's exactly what we need. The current team members are talented and dedicated, but they're still recovering from trauma. They need role models who can demonstrate that competitive excellence and personal integrity aren't mutually exclusive. Marcus agreed to attend a few team meetings as an observer before making any final commitment. What he found surprised him. The atmosphere was completely different from what he remembered during Davidson's tenure. Students seemed relaxed and engaged, asking questions freely, offering suggestions without fear of reprisal, and supporting each other's development rather than competing for the coach's approval. Jennifer Park, now a senior and one of the team's most experienced members, approached Marcus after his first observation session. It's like being on a completely different team, she said. We're actually learning again, instead of just trying to survive. How are people dealing with the competitive pressure? I noticed you have several tournaments coming up. That's been the biggest adjustment. We're not winning as much as we did under Davidson, but we're enjoying the process again. Professor Martinez keeps reminding us that the goal is education and personal growth, not just accumulating trophies. Marcus watched the team practice over the next several weeks, gradually becoming more involved in coaching activities. He worked with newer members on research techniques, helped develop argument strategies, and most importantly, served as a living example that it was possible to maintain high standards without resorting to psychological manipulation. The real test came during the team's first major tournament since Davidson's termination. Marcus accompanied them as an assistant coach, nervous about how they would perform under pressure without the fear-based motivation that had previously driven their success. What he witnessed exceeded his expectations. The team members supported each other throughout the competition, shared research and insights freely, and maintained their composure even when losing difficult rounds. While they didn't win the tournament, they performed respectably and returned to campus with their confidence intact. I'm proud of how everyone conducted themselves, Professor Martinez said during the bus ride home. You represented yourselves in the university with class and integrity. Marcus noticed that several team members seemed surprised by this positive feedback. Under Davidson's regime, anything less than victory had been treated as failure, requiring punishment and additional training. Professor Martinez, can I ask you something? Amanda Foster said from her seat near the back of the bus. Amanda had returned to the team after a semester break to focus on her mental health recovery. How do you measure our success if it's not just about winning tournaments? Excellent question. I measure success by your intellectual growth, your ability to construct and defend arguments, your respectful treatment of opponents, and your support for teammates. Winning is nice, but it's not the primary goal of our educational program. The conversation that followed revealed how deeply Davidson's toxic philosophy had affected the students' understanding of competition and success. Many of them had internalized the belief that victory justified any means, that personal worth was determined by tournament results, and that collaboration was a sign of weakness rather than strength. Rebuilding these fundamental assumptions became one of Marcus's primary contributions to the new program. During training sessions, he emphasized the educational value of debate, the importance of intellectual curiosity over argumentative dominance, and the strength that came from supporting teammates rather than competing against them. The transformation wasn't immediate or universal. Some former team members struggled to adapt to the new culture, particularly those who had been deeply invested in Davidson's hierarchical system. A few transferred to other schools or left competitive debate entirely, unable to reconcile their traumatic experiences with the possibility of healthy competition. But for those who remained, the progress was remarkable. David Kim, after months of therapy and gradual reintegration, returned to the team in a limited capacity. His recovery became a symbol of resilience and the possibility of healing even after severe psychological trauma. I never thought I'd set foot in a debate room again, David told Marcus during a private conversation. But Professor Martinez and the new team culture have given me back something I thought Davidson had destroyed forever. What's that? My love of learning, an argument for its own sake, not as a tool for gaining approval or avoiding punishment. As the academic year progressed, Marcus found himself transitioning from victim to advocate to leader. He developed workshops on healthy competition, ethical argument construction, and supportive team dynamics. Other universities began reaching out to learn about Westfield's program transformation, and Marcus became a sought-after speaker on preventing abuse in competitive academic programs. The most satisfying moment came during the spring semester when the rebuilt debate team achieved something unprecedented under Davidson's regime. They invited their tournament opponents to a social gathering where teams shared research, discussed argument strategies, and celebrated the intellectual aspects of debate competition rather than simply focusing on winners and losers.
This is what Davidson never understood, Marcus reflected to Professor Martinez as they watched students from different universities engaged in friendly intellectual exchange. Competition can bring out the best in people when it's structured around mutual respect and shared learning.
You've been instrumental in helping our students understand that truth, Martinez replied.
Your willingness to return and help rebuild has made all the difference in their recovery and growth. As Marcus prepared for his own graduation and law school enrollment, he felt a deep sense of completion. His expulsion from the debate team, which had initially seemed like a devastating setback, had ultimately become the catalyst for exposing systemic abuse, protecting vulnerable students, and rebuilding a healthier program. The final vindication came during the year-end awards ceremony when Dean Walsh presented Marcus with the university's Student Leadership Award for his role in promoting ethical behavior and student welfare. Marcus Williams exemplifies the courage and integrity we hope to instill in all our students, Dean Walsh said during the presentation. His willingness to stand up for what's right, even at personal cost, prevented serious harm to his fellow students and led to important reforms in how we oversee competitive programs. As Marcus accepted the award, he looked out at an audience that included many of his former teammates, Professor Martinez, and even David Kim, who had made tremendous progress in his recovery. The young man who had nearly lost his life to Davidson's psychological abuse was smiling and applauding, a living testament to the power of healing and institutional change. In his acceptance speech, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. 18 months ago, I was expelled from the debate team for challenging behavior I believed was wrong. That expulsion felt like the end of my world, but it turned out to be the beginning of something much more important. It taught me that sometimes being thrown out of a toxic system is exactly what you need to gain the perspective necessary to change it. He paused, making eye contact with several former teammates who had become close friends again. The real lesson here isn't about debate or coaching or even standing up to abuse. It's about the fact that institutions can change, people can heal, and students have the power to demand better from the systems that are supposed to serve them. As the ceremony concluded and people gathered for the reception afterward, Marcus felt overwhelmed by the transformation that had taken place. The debate team was thriving under ethical leadership, damaged students had found healing and renewed purpose, and the university had implemented policies that would protect future generations from similar abuse. Sarah approached him during the reception holding 2 glasses of punch. I've been thinking about what you said in your speech about being expelled from a toxic system, she said, handing him a glass. What about it? I think sometimes the people who get cast out are the ones who see most clearly what's wrong. You weren't expelled because you didn't fit in. You were expelled because you refused to accept something that was fundamentally wrong. Marcus smiled, remembering his mother's words about middle school bullies and the importance of standing up for others. Maybe getting expelled was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to figure out who I was apart from the team's approval, and it put me in position to help when the system finally collapsed. As the evening wound down, Marcus found himself standing outside the student center, looking up at the debate team's trophy case visible through the window. The awards Davidson's teams had won were still there, but they were now accompanied by new trophies earned by Professor Martinez's rebuilt program. More importantly, the case included a small plaque recognizing the team's commitment to ethical competition and mutual support. The circle was complete. The squad that had expelled him had indeed crumbled under the weight of its own toxicity, but from those ruins, something better had emerged. Marcus had been cast out of a corrupt system, but he had returned to help build something worthy of the students' talent and dedication. As he walked across campus toward his dorm, Marcus reflected on the complex irony of his situation. His expulsion had been intended as punishment, but it had become liberation. His former teammates' decision to exclude him had ultimately given him the perspective and motivation necessary to help them escape their own prison. Sometimes the greatest gift you can receive is being thrown away by people who don't understand your worth. And sometimes the most powerful way to change a system is to survive its attempt to destroy you. Then return with the wisdom and strength to help others find their own path to freedom.